Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. This session, it's about bridging digital islands in the oil and gas space. And we're going to talk in a bit more detail what these digital islands mean in a second. But the focus for us is cross-border. So, and specifically the border between US and Canada. For that, we have, as part of the conversation, Vincent Annunciato, who's the Director of Business Transformation and Innovation Division at the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. We also have Ana Gabriel Lobo. She's a Manager of Strategy and Operations at Mavennet. And myself, Patrick Mendig, I'm the CEO of Mavennet. And for the ones who don't know us, Mavennet is a company that builds solutions in the digital asset space, whether these assets are digitalizing a physical asset like steel, like oil and gas, we're going to be talking about today, a financial instrument, or people, if you can call identity, digital identity, digitalizing a person. So just to give you a bit of context on the size of what we're dealing with, oil and gas in Canada, the exports into the US, it's a huge market, huge relevance for Canada. So if you look at it in terms of dollars, it's about $122 billion and this is Canadian dollars, Vinny, and US dollars probably with the current rate $3.60. No, just joking. It's around $95 billion US, which accounts to being the largest category of exports from Canada. The second being vehicles, which is close to 50 million US dollars. So given that, what I'm going to do is, since we have an expert of what's really happening and how we're digitalizing this border between US and Canada, I wanted to let Vinny introduce himself. But essentially, Vinny, you've been very well recognized. I would say you've become famous thanks for the single window initiative that you've been driving since quite a few years ago. Why don't you give us a bit of your background and how did you get to start on thinking about the single window and how things develop for CBP in that aspect?
Thank you, Patrick. You know, it's funny, I've been with Customs since 1996, and I started out as an officer in the Port of Los Angeles, spent about 8 years in several different roles. I did passenger and did cargo processing. And then a job opened up on program called the Automated Commercial Environment, and moved across country and started working actually on truck manifests. That was the very first thing. And then we started working on free and secure trade, which the Canadian interests would understand very well. Having had that occur, we started to find that we weren't moving as quickly as we needed to in ACE. We needed to get things out. It was taking years and years and years to get past some of the work that we were doing. So we made a culture change. We moved into the agile environment. And my two big projects at the time were cargo release and the single window. And the single window is made up of 47 US agencies that have to deal with importation and even an exportation. And it was quite an undertaking. It took us 3 years at the point that we really started to outline everything. I had led, would you believe, Patrick, 60 people through a requirement session. to outline what we needed to do for the feature projects that we were going to have. And it was interesting the way that we designed it. We took 12 people that were my main group, and then we had everybody else work virtually. So the main group would work out process flows, requirements, and then pass it over to the second group, who would have 1 week to review it. And at the end of the week, if they disagreed with anything that we did, we would have it was like a court battle. We would bring the representative in from the second group. They would tell us what they thought was wrong, and we would have to make the decision right then and there to figure out whether or not we agreed or disagreed with each other. And then I had to drop the gavel, actually act as the judge to move it forward. The amazing thing is, for those two pieces, which were huge, right? You know, we're working on the largest transactional system in the world. We have a huge mission. We actually accomplished that in about 4 months, getting all that recorded. And then it was another month or two to get the documentation for the acquisition part of the process done. But it was an amazing, amazing experience, and probably one I don't want to relive again, because it was such a heavy burden. You know, it was like everything that goes right on a project like that is everybody else's fault, but everything that goes wrong was my fault. So, you know, it's just one of those scenarios. But we had, it went really well. I had an excellent development team. I had a couple of employees that were just top notch, very, very diligent. And I don't know if you want me to tell any old horror stories, but I don't know if I'm famous or infamous in the trade world for the single window, but it was quite an undertaking, you know, having to get in between, you know, 47 agencies, 13 of which had their own systems, and bring that into production was quite a daunting task, but successful. And just as a business engineer, for anybody out there, the key to that system was realizing that the trade needed to declare to the government what products it was bringing in, and then bring that associated data. So that was one of the keys, and that'll become important later on in the discussion when I say why I think blockchain is going to revolutionize the way we do business.
And so this is a massive integration project, which requires integration at many different levels, right? Because not just technical, it's not just having a bunch of different groups align. It's having everyone share a vision and go forward with it, which is very, very similar to what we're focusing on right now, externally in the market, right? Not just inside the CBP, right? Do you see it like that?
Yes, it was. You know, there was a legal undertaking, there was a policy undertaking. All of that was necessary steps to get that going. And one quick war story for you. In the beginning, I'm a GS15 director now. I was a branch chief at the time that this was happening. And I had to go in front of the acting secretary, or assistant secretary, excuse me, of the Treasury, and all of the leads for the partner government agencies. Now, I'm not a tall guy. I'm 5'6". So I was already nervous about bringing my proposal forward, because what they had done was they had worked out this. It was really a beautiful system. The way they had worked out, it was almost card catalog, but it was so labor intensive for customs, because the way they wanted to do it was they wanted to take the data and have it basically tossed out the system and have our system figure out where that data should go. Well, you start running into problems because certain agencies look at data with different definitions. You then get into the nuances of importation, which gets very complicated. So it was definitely. So I walk into this room and everybody looked like they were 8 feet tall. And what had happened was I had been working at the time for the lady, her name is Cindy Allen, and in fact she's a VP over at FedEx now. And I was looking over all of the data, and I had done a little bit of work on the Lacey Act, which has to do timber, and we were successful in a small project, but something wasn't driving. I was looking at what the commission that I just said with ITDS had been looking at, and then I was looking at what I had, and I could not get the data to work. And I told my boss at the time, I need to go home because I can't be distracted. I don't want phone calls. I don't want anybody talking to me. I need to just go home and take a look at this. So I go home and I lay the paperwork out on my bed, and I'm looking at the documents. And for 2 hours, a chess game, for 2 hours, I'm looking at all of this stuff. And then all of a sudden it struck me that on the first record that came in, we needed to name the agencies for the declaration that the data would be a part of. And then we needed to loop in whether it was a product or a part. And all of a sudden it hit me like, it was like an epiphany. And you know what happened? I passed out for 2 hours.
What?
It was so much brain power, at least for me. I'm not saying that I'm terribly intelligent, but it was so much brain power that it exhausted me. When I finally figured out what it was, my wife came in and found me passed out. I passed out on top of the paperwork. So with my proposal, and I had also taken that proposal to a couple of the technology people that I've been working with that are no longer with Customs, but they're retired now, but I had, very high regard for it. And they kept telling me, you know what, it's going to work. So I was confident it was going to work. And I brought it to, the folks, the partner government agencies, and within 2 hours, they fell in line with the proposal that we put forward, because they could see how the data was structured and ordered. Right now we're using an EDI platform, electronic data interchange, and we're constrained to the data falling in on an 80 characters into a certain position. And if you miss that position, it blows up the system, right? It will kick it back out. So again, when we talk about blockchain, we'll start talking about some of the advancements we're making there. But that's just one of my old war stories from those days. But I was very nervous at the time, and looking back on it, I laugh. So,
so let's talk a little bit about what we were mentioned before, that transition or almost expansion, right, from integrating internally to integrating externally. So right now, the DHS is running the SVIP program, the Silicon Valley Innovation Program, and the CVP is also active participant of that program. Maybe why don't you give a bit of details of what that program is trying to achieve and the overarching goals?
Well, I think personally the Silicon Valley Initiative program is fantastic. We get to hire companies like yours, Patrick, startup companies coming out of Silicon Valley or through Silicon Valley. That's how we're hiring. But these young upstart companies that have really good ideas and are focused on, getting the job done. And so the way it works is it's a phased approach. And I think it's absolutely the fairest way to handle it. So both sides at each phase can say, you know what, we don't want to go further, or, we're happy with moving on to the next contract. So phase one is minimal viable product. Phase two, we do the bulk of the business programming, the development. Phase three, they use a red team, independent, to come in and make sure that the government is getting what it asked for, that the team has built what it was supposed to, and that it's going to work. And then phase four is integration. Each of these phases take about 6 months. In some cases, it can take a little bit longer if you need more development time. Maybe it's 9 months, which we've done actually with phase two. And CBP is, I believe, the largest supporter of the program. We have 5 projects moving forward right now. These are all funded by DHS, who is in the department. We're at the agency level. And then once we actually get the software to the point where we're happy with it and we're ready to integrate, the agency then makes the decision to purchase the software, the licensing, and the ongoing maintenance. And then, of course, as a commercial program, companies like yourselves are able to go out and sell the services to the private sector on the outside. So I think it's a win-win situation. We get what we want out of the project. We get to, have a say in the development. So it's kind of like a government off-the-shelf system, but it's customized by the users. So I think it's an outstanding program.
Yeah, and from our perspective, I think that it's a very innovative way to generate and adopt innovation, as opposed to maybe going and directly funding a large organizations that potentially would take longer and keep things locked down, right? So I think it's a very well-run program, and also the work that we're doing with other entities and other organizations within the cohort, I think is just elevating all of us as a whole. It's elevating the water level. So
I just want to make one comment on what you said, because I absolutely agree with what you just said. The problem that you have sometimes when you get into these large development contracts is that the company on the other end is looking at horizontal and vertical sales. So they're always trying to expand horizontally to keep the project going, and they're also trying to get into other areas moving vertically. The nice thing about what we're doing with these projects is we're containing it to the project. So you have to compete if you want something else, but there's no given that we're going to move forward in any other area. And obviously, we're controlling at each phase the expansion. So the government also gets away with a more cost-effective solution.
Yeah. So for all the organizations out there that are seeing this, and all the startups, and are thinking, in next iterations potentially participating, what are you looking for a company? In this case, Mavennet has had some success with you guys, but what are the traits and the specific things that you're looking at companies to bring with them to be part of the program and succeed?
Yeah, this is an area where it's highly competitive for companies to get on board. I think we had, I want to say for the last round, we had 87 companies register to get, considered for us to hire them. If you're looking to get into this program, one is as a small business, you're going to be submitting documentation that we're going to review and scrutinize. And if you don't meet certain requirements, especially the ones that we're listing out on interoperability and the business aspects of it, it gets dropped right away. But if you meet those requirements, we will call you in for an interview. You get a panel interview, so you'll have technical and business staff quizzing you on exactly what we're looking for. And to be a little bit more discreet, what we try to do, so I'm on the business side, we ask questions about experience in the sector that you're applying for. So if you're in the food sector, you would have to have some experience. What puts you above the competition? It's those types of questions that we want to know. The technical side, they're weeding through to make sure, one, is the business a strong business? Is it viable? The other thing is that they're looking at, because they have the contracts as well, they're also looking at, are you able to at least understand what we're asking for technically? Because we have very stringent standards that we want followed. And then can you produce those standards? In fact, even in phase one, when you're doing a minimum viable product, you've got to do what's called walking the talk. Whatever you said that you can do to meet our standards, you've got to be able to follow that into phase one, and we're constantly monitoring it. So it is really competitive, though, and we've had, unfortunately, some companies that we really liked that just, didn't make the cut on certain products. But it's just the nature of the beast, because one company is going to win out eventually.
Okay, so let's switch gears to oil. Viniana, I think what I'm going to do is just provide some context. I have a couple slides here that I think will help as context for people that are not as familiar with oil and gas. Let me know if you can see the slides right now. Can you see the slide?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, perfect. So just a bit of context, because everyone knows oil. Everyone knows, that there's in North America pipelines that carry oil. But I don't think everyone knows with a lot of detail how it actually flows. It's not just a continuous flow of oil. It's not like water. Essentially, in very high level, I'm just going to spend a couple, 1 or 2 minutes just explain this, because it's could be relevant for what we're going to talk about later. But essentially, bitumen in Canada is extracted from the ground. So essentially, a peanut butter consistency product that needs to be diluted with a diluent, right? So otherwise, it's you can imagine trying to pour peanut butter down the drain; it won't flow, and it gets it from smaller pipelines down into bigger, larger pipelines, and at times it also gets blended with other different crude coming from other locations. So the way oil is shipped is not just a continuous flow through the pipeline, or at least not always. It's more akin to IP packets, right? So it's batches that are scheduled, that are sent at the specific points of time, and those batches might contain just the product meat, or might contain a pool of different blends or something in between. So there is inspection points across this whole process, across the whole transportation at different points. There is a point where the crude might change hands, and at some point it crosses the border. It might or might not get stored, refined, and finally might get delivered in different refined products to either gas stations or whatever the refined product is in concrete. So all this process is associated with a lot of documentation that goes along with it, that's being created by different organizations, and that there is more than 1 or 2 or 3 organizations that are part of this value chain, right? So the keeping track and being able to pull up every single document as required at any given point of time can be difficult. And the way we've been tackling this problem, and it's not just oil, but as a society, has been by focusing on creating digital transformations inside each individual organization. So a lot of organizations have spent millions and millions of dollars on digitalizing their whole operations, which is great, right? It gives them the visibility of knowing where each product is at any given point of time within their four walls, right? The problem is that the moment that these organizations are communicating with other organizations, what tends to happen is that digitalization goes out of the window. People either print or send an email, or in the best of cases, they might upload an Excel, which, if it changes hands 2-3 times, you don't really know if someone has changed that information or not. So you don't have a level of confidence on that information. So this is what we call digital islands, right? Every single organization is digitalized, but at the moment they're trying to interoperate with organizations, that digitalization disappears, right? So it's essentially like creating TCP/IP, creating the internet, but everyone is using a different TCP/IP stack, right? So and what this is resulting is in large gaps in terms of the data that it's exchanged. So there is a 5% discrepancy in terms of the amount of oil that allegedly is reported to be going down from Canada into the U.S. and what the regulatory agencies are reporting on the U.S. side, that it's actually crossing the border, right? So almost $4 billion difference. So it's a big gap, right? And it's a big gap in terms of the data. So, and that goes to show the confidence that we have in the data in the current state that we have today. Okay, so this just a bit of context for us for the conversation, but Vinny, I think it's quite obvious based on the intro that I provided, the size of the market, but I just never, regardless of that, wanted to ask you specifically why oil was one of the first products for you guys to tackle in terms of digitalization.
Patrick, when we get our projects, it's actually not my group determining what projects move forward. It's the policy offices and their needs. And there was a need for us to not only get greater insight into the industry, but also to help out some of the companies that are dealing with free trade agreements and be able to know that they're not going to lose their status if they file something wrong because they don't have the right information or they didn't understand it correctly. So we're trying to provide a system that will give them a bit more assurance, help us to track the oil imports into the U.S. properly, and give us a view of that data a little bit earlier in the process than we get now.
Okay, so essentially, that's the specific problem that you're trying to tackle, right? So you're trying to have better confidence on the information that you're receiving. On one side, you want to have a better visibility of what is actually going to happen, so that you're ready with a certain level of assurance of what how the feature is going to materialize, and as a side effect, also I assume reduce the cost of the current validations, of the effort that you have to go through to validate every set of data that you're receiving today.
Yeah, that about sums it up. And I would like to say also that when you're looking in general at all the projects we're doing, it's amazing to me that all the workflows, the generalities of them are the same. It's the specifics that are different. So we're trying to get to pre-release, pre-arrival data. These are areas that we don't normally see anything. On top of that, a lot of times we have to ask for data, and I don't know if you know this, but in some cases we don't even do that through automation. We got to ask for extra data through the snail mail. So it could take customs 30 days to get a response. And then if it's not correct, it's another 30 days. So what we're trying to do is allow the operators to have hands-on data in front of them to give them the information to make quicker decisions. So these items are expedited in that sense. When we're seeing that stuff up front, if you're providing all of that data, we are more apt to believe that, you know, we're getting good, solid, credible data, and that whatever the industry is putting in for, as far as duty rates and getting expedited service, of course, anybody who's partaking in this is going to have that. So, and that's across the board with all of these blockchain programs.
Mm. And one side effect for the industries of this would be being able to actually prove origination with essentially the click of one button, which has been a bit of a problem in the past, and even before there's been cases in where diluent has been shipped from Peru, and
Yes.
and so the NAFTA status has been compromised, and so being able to digitalize that helps the industry as well substantially, right?
Yeah, and I think, you know, the terminology that we're starting to use a little bit more and more is that we're starting to get to what we call digital twins, digital representations of the product, and that's what's starting to happen. The product is starting to be represented in a manner that, if you think about it, where you are doing paper processes, if you can reduce those manual processes, first of all, that's a cost savings for the private sector on paper storage, uncontrolled data, but you've also got to expand your mind to start thinking about AI and machine learning. So if you're starting to get data where you were once getting paper processes, obviously you're going to start finding trends and things that you weren't aware of. And I think both sides, both the government and the private sector, will benefit from that scenario as well.
Yeah, and the way we look at it is that you need to have a first layer of trusted information, trusted, reliable information. And once you have that, you can use that same data for a bunch of different use cases and functionality, whether that is identifying specific anomalies at different levels. It could be thinking about how do you use that data for these companies, the ones that want to do it, to do regulatory reporting, because a lot of this data will be very, very similar. But the base that we need to create requires that same that alignment in terms of at the protocol level of how we're exchanging information in a secure and reliable way, which at the end of the day is, I think, one of the main priorities of the SVIP program as a whole in not just oil, but other areas as well. So regarding now the transition to USMCA, does that transition impose any new challenges, or does it create an urgency for digitalization, or does it take a bit pressure off? Can you speak a little bit to what we should expect in the next year or so?
Yeah, Patrick, I'm not a policy expert on USMCA, but from what I have heard, it's actually putting us in a position to enforce and uphold what USMCA is doing on those negotiations. So I think we're in good shape. The fact that we'll have the data, it'll be more manageable, and that it will give us things like, country of origin, the makeup of the oil. It'll allow customs to do a better job in that area. One number that pops into my head, by the way, so these are estimates that we've gotten from the government. I don't exactly know how accurate they are. So let's just say that what I'm hearing from my field personnel is that there could be a savings as much as $70 million a year just on being able to file for FTA status with these submissions. That's right off the bottom line costs of the oil industry. I believe the effect is especially large for the mid-range producers and stuff like that, but at least that's some of the estimates coming in.
All right. And how do you see evolving? So NeoFlow or our product for oil and gas is, there's a value proposition for the industry. There's a value proposition for the CBP as well. How do you see that evolving in terms of interaction with ACE, with the overall CBP? Is this something you can talk about?
Yeah, as long as I don't have to tell you about the internal workings, because then I have to ship both you and Anna off to Area 51, right?
Visit some friends.
So the first two projects that we're initiating, obviously pipeline and steel, pipeline oil and steel. What we're trying to do is, again, focus on the pre-release, pre-arrival data and make it available. So what we're trying not to do is have to process through those systems. So the interaction with ACE is that when the data comes in, it'll be made available by hyperlinking it through shipment detail. So either a master or a master house combination, an entry number. So what we're seeing is layered data. The pre-release, pre-arrival data of the intent to sell, then the actual makeup of the oil, being able to track it over multiple hands as it sells on the exchange, and then once it's imported, and then what will happen is a broker or potentially an importer, who knows, maybe even a carrier, will supply us with some level of information to alert us that the oil is moving into the US. And then that ties to the entry data in our system. So when somebody goes in and looks specifically at an entry or an entry summary, that data would be linked. Now, there's a really interesting discussion going on right now within our information technology arena. And that is that we're starting to think about whether or not we have to store all of that data or whether or not we can just access it. So there's security teams that we have to get through. There's an opening of minds, because right now we store everything we get. We have to look at this also from a legal standpoint, but the linkage between the systems will be internal. And either you'll provide us with a secure key for us to access, or you'll supply us with a secure key so that we can download the data on an ongoing basis. So it's going to be interesting. You're paving the path for more and more blockchain projects. Obviously, the ones going into the second round, such as natural gas, which is a little bit more complicated, a little bit different. When you get into the molecular level. And then we have food safety, and we also have e-commerce. All of those pieces are starting to come in as well, and we're going to start pivoting a little bit more to doing a little bit more processing with the blockchain programs and informing ACE of what's happening. But in this case, ACE is, in a way, we're passive to ACE. We're just passing the data, and ACE is doing the processing, but we'll have early view of the data. So again, good for expediting. And just one comment, there's a couple of things about blockchain that I love. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about it a little bit later on, but the amazing thing is that we are not sacrificing security for enforcement. Security for facilitation or facilitation for security. There's no sacrifice of one for the other. They're both coming up at the same time, which that kind of an increase is one of the best things the government can have and offer to the private sector.
Yeah, one of the drivers for the CBP is essentially making the border more secure, but at the same time making it a lot more efficient, right? And remove any kind of friction, right? So on that note, what's maybe let's talk about that angle about blockchain. Why blockchain for the CVP? How did it started? And then maybe we can go into the benefits from the interoperability perspective. And I think you have a couple of slides there to make to facilitate making the point across.
Yeah, give me just a second to pull this up, and I'll talk off of these slides. Has it popped up in front of you yet, Patrick?
No, it hasn't.
All right, well, I'll start talking and hopefully it will come up, but there it goes. Okay. So there's a couple of things that I want to make sure everybody's aware of with blockchain. And if you've been to other conferences, you would have seen this, but there's some very important points. When blockchain first came on, came on strong, due to Bitcoin, there was a lot of misconceptions out there. And at the time, you would have thought it was going to solve world peace, world hunger. And then when I would go out and talk about it, everybody thought that I was getting wealthy off of, Bitcoin, that I was digging. And then I was going to move to Canada because I needed cheaper electricity. I mean, that was the thing. It was kind of crazy. So right now, I got 17 years doing development work as a business engineer. And so, the words that scare me the most is when somebody looks at me, especially if they're higher level than I am, and they look at me and they go, all you have to do, or just, it's like it, or it's simple. I cringe because when you have large systems like CBP does, you run into a scenario where, you hit one data element and that one data element can touch 17 different parts of your system, right? So nothing is ever easy. So I went into blockchain like really skeptically. The hype was so high on it that I remember the first time I got invited to a conference, they were asking me about, to tell them how great it was. And I'm like, I'm a development person. Until I know exactly what's going on, I won't do that. And what wound up happening is I started to study it, blockchain, and I really now understand that, it's the safest way to trade data over the internet. That's its niche. It gets you out to, obviously more people than we're used to, more entities than we're used to, because we're able to expand outside of our normal channels of retrieving data. On top of that, using the ledger is excellent because you always have a record of what has transpired. So when you update your record, you add data to it. We've seen what's gone on in the past. And then just understanding what it does. And I found that in my view, most of the time, people didn't even understand what it did. It was like, at one point, it was like people were just pointing their elbows and saying, do blockchain. I don't care what you do, just do blockchain. And you got to imagine especially a development company that's out there looking for large contracts, they're salivating over a person who doesn't understand the technology because you're just going to keep going with it. So we did a couple of proof of concepts. I was able to understand exactly what blockchain did. I understood what the hype was. And then when we started to look really closely at it, we also were aligned with DHS Science and Technology Directorate. So some key points were interoperability, meaning not open source where you can put the software anywhere, but interoperable in the sense that all the softwares can talk to each other. You have a worldwide web. It doesn't matter whether you're on a Mac or you're on a PC. It doesn't matter what type of Internet Explorer you're using, right? You're able to access that no matter, it's fully interoperable. So that became very important to us. Another big one was data correlation. What do you put on the blockchain? What do you keep off of it? And we use a hybrid approach on that, and I could talk a little bit about that later. The biggest thing was making sure we had the right context and business cases. We didn't have that. We didn't have anything. And then the biggest thing for us was to make sure that we took a long pole view and did not remain short-sighted. So just a couple of things. There's some real business value in blockchain. I want to get through some myths for anybody who's not fully aware of what blockchain does. But when you hear the words trust and immutability, these are sales terms. Now, Patrick, I'm not putting down the way you used it because I understood the context and what you were talking about. But trust in a blockchain world is not that I trust that Patrick works for Mavennet or that Anna works for Mavennet or that I trust my wife and my kids, well, sometimes my kids, to do the right thing, right? But trust means that it's two aspects. One is it's the correlation between two different nodes comparing data and says that nothing, the original data is the original data and everybody agrees on that. When you start looking at some of the stuff that we're doing with the interoperability specs, we get more trust by being able to verify identities. So I just want everybody to understand that. Immutability, obviously, once something is put on the blockchain, it's there permanently, and it's not deleted off. So having that record, as I mentioned before, is great. Now, I'm sure some systems can do some deletions, but for the most part, we like the immutability because we want to see if you're adding stuff to the data. We want to see what the original was, and it allows everybody to keep that ledger-based system going on. Just remember, with all of this, with blockchain, obviously, it doesn't improve your data. So if somebody falsifies data or puts bad data on there, you simply have safer data. So that's the old adage of garbage in, garbage out, right?
It also creates accountability, right? If you put something that's wrong, anyone can point at you, right?
Yes, absolutely. And then I talked a little bit about the entity identification. We need to be able to identify through automation whether or not a company or a person is legitimate. I'm on the cargo side, so I'm more interested in the entities, the corporate entities, than I am the individuals at this point, although at some point they all tie in. On the tracking side, I'm sure everybody in the audience is aware that for the most part, we're seeing a lot of this taking place now. The concepts of being able to take something off the manufacturing line, in this case, an oil from the producer, right out of the spigot all the way into the US, and knowing all that origin data is extremely important. I've been on a mission for several years, 3 years now, to make this happen. And then who's in control at what time period with the data. This becomes very important when you start thinking about pipeline in terms of sales and stuff like that, but also other commodities, right? Who has the actual commodity and who's supplying what data. But the biggest thing that blockchain did for us is really the piece in the middle that talks about group input. And that group input, what we call the team sport of data, allows everybody now to contribute to the supply chain. That's the key change. And when I was developing ACE, I never had a view of that. Never looked at it from that, because we will pour everything into one bucket. So for instance, a broker or an importer who is filing, all the data pours into that bucket. They then pour all of that into ACE. ACE then pours all of that to the partner government agencies, who then processes, sends us back their status notifications. We wait, collect them all, and then we send them back out. That's going to change with blockchain, because everybody's going to be on at the same time, receiving the data at the same time, and everything's going to happen in real time. So that's important. I think the bottom piece of this is that blockchain is not going to change the foundation of what we collect, but how we collect it. and that is real-time data from real participants, not going to be rekeying data, and it's going to be whoever has an interest at the time is supplying it, and also it's not going to be linear. It's going to be companies putting it in at the time that they need to, and I think that is going to make the world just a little bit smaller. Do you want me to talk about interoperability, Patrick? Or do you want me to hold off?
Yeah, let's cover that because I think it's important. And then we're ticking out. So afterwards, what we'll do is we'll switch over to just make it real for people with a literal 5-minute demo.
Perfect. Okay, so I'll make this quick. So there are 3 areas that, based on the 2 proof of concepts that we did, which were one on, it was actually on free trade agreements, and the other one was on the intellectual property rights. So for the business folks who may not be as savvy, a decentralized key management system, we're also talking about a decentralized, I should say, a decentralized ID or a DID. I actually gave you, Patrick, an older slide, so I have some of the older titles on here. But a DID is an ID number, much like a passport number or a license number. And obviously, let's say that I am out on the road and I'm speeding and Anna pulls me over, okay? So if I only gave her an ID number, it wouldn't be enough. Now, I do want to say that the importance of the DID, for those of you out there trying to understand all of this, is that it has what's called a public-private pairing, okay? That public-private pairing means that any network that I show up on, Anna will be able to recognize me because it's my public persona. But the private key that's associated to it, I can't be stolen, right? So, you know, nobody can come in and take my identification away and pretend that they're Vinny Annunziato. So that's important there. So going with that traffic cop scenario, so Anna pulls me over, I give her an ID number. Obviously, that's not going to be enough. So she asks for my license. And I hand over my license to Anna, and she sees that I'm 6 foot tall, blonde hair, and blue-eyed, and I'm often confused for Superman. Okay? Of course, that's not true, right? But the thing is that she's able to get now some biographical data to actually verify that I am who I say I am. But is that enough? What if I forged my license? What verifiable claims or verifiable credentials does is it gets you back to the original source of that data that says whether or not the license is legit. So in the US, that would be the DMV, right? So she would be able to now know that the license is active and legitimate, that the biographical data meets the person in front of her, and that she can ID me properly. Now, when you start thinking about automation, that's happening instantaneously. Even if we get it to a 95 percentile, that is a humongous increase in being able to do this. And then the last piece we have is actually supposed to be now an encrypted vault. Oh gosh, I switched. The DIDs that's at the end, I'm used to talking in a certain pattern, but the decentralized keys management system, that's what threw me off earlier, is actually now called an encrypted vault. So let me use, Anna, I'm sorry I'm putting you on the spot, but since you're up next, it's a good segue. So let's say Anna and I want to do business with each other, but we don't want anybody else to do to know what we're doing. So what happens is Anna then has a post office box, and she hands me a key. So I can go in and look at my data needs whenever I want, but when I'm done, I go in and I lock it back up, and it's safe behind the post office box. So if you take that understanding and you think about your firewall and the trade already has a firewall. They keep their data safe. They can send me an encrypted key, the government, and say, hey, 24/7 access, whenever you need to get to it, you have access. Okay. And then we don't have to worry about it being anybody getting in there other than the people who need to know. And the trade can also give those encrypted keys to anybody who's participating in the supply chain to view whatever data that they're able to do. All of these right now, 2 of the 3, the DIDs and the verifiable credentials, are already with the W3C. They have an international working group. They're maturing as we speak. You guys are working on them as well. And then the encrypted vault, which you believe is being argued over by multiple standards communities as to where it's going to land. So we're waiting to see. We think it's going to be W3C, but it could be Oasis and a couple of other pieces. Anyway, Patrick, that's a long-winded explanation, so I'm going to stop there and make sure that Anna gets her day in the sun. So let me stop sharing here.
That's awesome. So let's make it real for people. I think we covered a lot of ground from the business to the technical side, but I think nothing better than showing the real thing. Anna, over to you.
Thanks, Patrick. So I'll just share my screen to show one slide to make it real for people. Second.
And in the meantime, while Anna's setting up, if you have any questions, we'll probably won't have time to cover them, but just please type them in the chat and we'll reach out to you if you leave your email and try to cover any answers after the session.
All right. Thanks, Patrick. So as you were mentioning, NeoFlow is a platform that was created to address the USDHS use case. It's a platform that creates a single source of truth in the energy industry. So instead of having these isolated repositories of data that Vinny and Patrick were talking about, we create a secure, standardized digital fabric that actually allows for faster, cheaper, and in the end, just simply better processes. So in this way, the power of the platform really is that by creating that digital representation of the asset, with a verified history by multiple participants in the value chain, it enables you to trust the product's history, even if it hasn't been directly generated by you. So ultimately, the vision really is to create an ecosystem where multiple applications can be built on top of NeoFlow. So for example, what if you could instantly prove the origin of an asset or instantaneously verify the environmental compliance of an oil barrel, or settle instantaneously royalty payments? So as I mentioned, we're proving this concept by focusing initially on the digital border clearance use case of oil and gas. But the idea is to then grow the platform to other use cases, other commodities, like electricity, renewable energies, and natural gas. So what I'll do now is that I'll show you the user interface that we've built for demonstration purposes. Just a second. Okay, so this is the interface that we've built for demo. Now NeoFlow is meant to
interject there, Anna. Just so the power of all this is the data behind, right? So this interface is just to make it easier for a human to consume and observe and process the information, right? So just to put it in context for people.
Right. So yeah, as I was saying, NeoFlow is meant to communicate system to system with the external ERP software, as well as other blockchain networks. So the user doesn't input manually any information, and it's not expected to interact extensively with the interface. Rather, we receive external data that triggers the different events. So I'm going to log in as an oil producer. I have it. And what we see here is the complete inventory of these of this producer in particular. Each product has an identifier, and it's associated with a distributed identifier for this entity, allowing anyone to know who executed which action in each product, and anyone can verify this as well, as Vinny was mentioning. We also have the type of commodity. In this case, we have bitumen, naphtha, different streams of crude oil, the origin of the products, when they were created, and the status, if it's active or consumed. And then also the last event that was executed on that product. So I'll show you this stream in particular, the Western Canadian Select. So the platform shows key details of the asset. So in this case, the origin, we see that it was extracted in Fort McMurray, physical and chemical specifications, its composition as well. So in this case, this stream was upgraded from bitumen extracted from Canada and naphtha that was sourced from Peru. We can also see the different events on the platform. And this is really important because these are all events that have been contributed by different participants in the supply chain. And if we go to one of these events, for example, a transport event that was done by the pipeline company, we can see the record and we can verify the blockchain transaction as well. And these events, in the end, translate into a trusted digital certification that we've called the appellation of origin. And this certificate is updated in real time. And as I mentioned, it has been verified by the multiple stakeholders as well. So we can see as well all of the specifications. And the power of this technology also is that it allows you to prove the status of an asset. So if we go to the bitumen from which this stream was created, we can see that it's already been consumed. So if someone wanted to sell the same barrel of bitumen twice, this wouldn't be possible because the product has already been marked as consumed. So we're also avoiding double spend of assets. So yeah, ultimately, NeoFlow is providing an instant view of any asset without actually having to wait for days to rely on self-reported data. That's often a PDF document that can be easily forged by anyone with reasonable Photoshop skills. So with that, that's all I have. Patrick, I'll hand it off to you to wrap us off. But this is just a small showcase of the concept. Just wanted to say that we're at a very exciting point because we're also expanding the platform to other commodities apart from oil.
Thanks a lot, Ana. I think we're over time, but there's also a question in the chat saying cross-border oil and gas is critical to both of our economies. How do we make trade simpler in this domain? Do you want to take it, or should I share my thoughts?
Well, I mean, just in general, I think based on the project that we're doing with you, Patrick, with Mavennet, I think that's what we're doing is we're making it simpler. We're allowing the data to come on board, to be monitored properly, and then to make entry against that data as well. So your thoughts would be deeply appreciated.
Yeah, so from my perspective, at the end of the day, what we're doing is digitalizing the barrel of oil and digitalizing the interactions between all the different organizations. So, in a way that it wasn't possible before, because digitalization, again, was simply inside a specific organizations. And this is a product that it's driven by a whole value chain, right? So you need to think about improving as a whole, as the value chain as a whole, not as individual, optimizing every individual organization. So I think we're going in the right direction, and obviously a lot of ground to cover in the next years, both technically and also from the business side. But I think the future will keep coming. So I think we're done. If you have any other questions, we're out of time, but just feel free to post them in the chat or reach out to us directly, either patrick@mavennet.com or anna@mavennet.com. Vinny, thanks a lot for your participation. I'm very glad that we managed to get through the whole presentation without being shipped to Area 51. So thanks a lot.
Thank you for inviting me, Patrick. I enjoyed the discussion.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.